Hi everybody, welcome back to Geezer Rider. This video is about motorcycle phone mounts with wireless chargers integrated into them. So that means that the phone is attached to a mount that attaches to your handlebars or a perch mount or something else on your phone, and it clips into the phone mount somehow, and it charges the phone without a cable between the bike and the phone or between the mount and the phone. Obviously there's power being run to the mount, but again, no physical cable between the phone and the mount or the bike and the mount. And what that means is that you can get on and off the bike without having to disconnect the cable from the phone, at least for the purposes of charging. There wouldn't be a cable there. So this is the first in a multi-part series on the wireless charging mounts. And if you've been watching this channel, especially if you've already watched the why do I want Bluetooth in my helmet video, some of this makes sense. But for those of you that haven't already watched that, I encourage you to go back and look at that and remind you that on this channel, we dive more in depth. So the reason for creating this video is that I have seen just a few videos online about this particular phone mount. Actually something similar, not even necessarily exactly like this one, a video, but not very in depth at all. So what I want to do is go through the reasons that I wanted the wireless phone charger mount, and how I came about to select the one that I selected, and we'll go through an unboxing together. I haven't unpacked it yet, and we'll see what my assumptions were about the what I ordered, what I purchased, and how correct or incorrect they may be. And then if it looks like something I want to continue forward with, we'll do a third one on the mount to a specific motorcycle. Obviously, mounts for other motorcycles will be available, but we'll go through the reasoning that I went through, why I wanted one to begin with, and how I chose what I chose. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. Just a quick note, if you like the content, please give the video a thumbs up. Same true for any other videos on the channel. If you hit subscribe and the bell notification, you'll be notified any time any new content is posted to the channel, and we appreciate you supporting us in that way. So it basically came down to three reasons that evolved over time in different bikes for why I wanted wireless. I wanted a phone mount for the bike to begin with, and then why I wanted charging, and more particularly why I wanted wireless charging. So first is I wanted to be able to more easily access the phone to skip tracks on streaming media, or give it a thumbs up and thumbs down, because like Pandora, for example, will sample in music that might be outside the genre you've chosen, or just, it's just what's in their licensed library, so they throw something at you, and you may be like, hey, I didn't think I'd care for that while I'm riding, but that's pretty good. Give it a thumbs up, hopefully at a stoplight or something, or thumbs down, my God, I don't need this in my head while I'm riding, thumbs down. So my current bike's infotainment system isn't integrated with my streaming apps. So I can't do that from the bike's infotainment system controls. So, and reason number two, and this is the epitome of a first world problem, strictly convenience issue. On my current bike, the existing USB port, if I was to use that to charge my phone on the bike, is integrated into the bike's infotainment system. You're like, oh, well, that should be great, right? You got direct connection. The problem is, it's already connected via Bluetooth, and I have an Android, and the infotainment system doesn't have Apple CarPlay or Android, or Apple Play or Android Auto. So if I plug it into the existing USB port, it charges the phone just fine. The problem is the bike's infotainment system brings up a list of two phones, the Bluetooth connected phone and the physical connected phone. And the first is to the phone's internal storage. So it's trying to treat it like it is an MP3 player, an iPod or something. And then the second is the overall phone, which is the Bluetooth connection that I mentioned before, to the infotainment system to pass through the streaming apps and music players that are app-based out to the bike. So with the USB plugged in, you have to manually go through the selection process every time you turn on or start the bike. If you don't have the USB connected and you still have the streaming app open, the phone's entertainment system will automatically start resuming playing. So if I am playing Pandora and I don't have the phone physically connected to the USB cable, and I just shut off the bike, Pandora stops, the bike stops. When I get back on, I turn the bike on, I don't have to do anything. Once it automatically makes the Bluetooth connection between the phone and the bike, it just starts playing again where it left off. And that's the desired behavior. But obviously without that and using the USB connection, or I'm sorry, the downside of that scenario where there is no physical connection is that it's not charging, right? So I don't have any physical connection there. It's not charging. I don't go through the inconvenience of having to manually select which quote unquote phone is being used. But the downside is it's not charging. So that can be an issue on a longer trip, you know, or if you're starting off with a low battery because you went out the door and you forgot to put it on charge or something. And I could rig up a separate, you know, USB charging port, not integrated into the infotainment system, but that's kind of clunky and has limited value add. And I kind of like to keep things nice and neat. And again, first world problem, right? And finally, reason number 3, the maps on the GPS portion of my infotainment system are from about 2016. So the model year's 2016. Chances are that map was actually created for the production cycle, which was likely either very early 2016 or even more likely somewhere from June to you know, December 2015, or again, like I said, early January 2016. So they're a little long in the tooth in 2020. There's been a lot of construction all across the nation, you know, repairing infrastructure and stuff. So things aren't quite current with that old map. And the cost of the updates to the map for my bike are roughly the cost of buying a standalone GPS if I wanted to. So I thought of doing this and mounting a separate GPS on the bike, but it seemed excessive. And again, I'd have to run power to it. And I don't like a lot of clutter on the bike. And I got to thinking, my Android S8, which is my current phone, is pretty weather resistant. And so I started thinking about using Google Maps or Waze, which are now integrated, Google bought Waze, on my phone instead of the integrated nav. And obviously this would require a mount. And I want to be sure I had charging capabilities since the screen would be lit the whole time. And again, like I said, my bike doesn't have Android Auto in reference to the Android S8. So using the phone mount would make it much easier to take and potentially make phone calls. I don't really do that. You know, actually it's probably maybe 3 times a riding season, but generally the people that would want to call me know I'm riding and only call for something emergent. So the easier it is to, you know, just take and filter that call so I can get off the road and concentrate and, you know that it's a call that I need to deal with is even better. And as I mentioned before in the other video about Bluetooth, I have Bluetooth in my helmet, so I can use its microphone and internal speakers in the helmet for both phone calls and hearing the navigation prompts. And obviously, if I wanted to, I could turn off the bike speakers and route the music through the helmet as well. So in reviewing all the phone mounts that I could find that had any kind of a decent review, and I even looked at some that appeared to be stinkers just to look at any design ideas that, you know, they were using us as their beta testers. They weren't quite ready for prime time, but if they ever got their quality control up to speed, it might be something worth looking at. And, you know, I don't want to go through those early adopter pains, but sometimes it tells you, hey, when they get that right, that's something I want, and maybe I'll just hold off and wait till that's available. So in looking at all those items, I came with the following takeaways, and I'll try and throw up a couple examples on the screens of the ones that I thought I might want and decided not to, or just, you know, what I'm talking about when I describe certain phones. So we'll see how good I can do with my editing software at transitioning those photos in for you. So takeaway A. There wasn't any free space in a good area on my handlebars to clamp a handlebar mount. So I've got a buddy that's got a RAM mount, and he's got this thumb screw with basically a C-clamp claw with rubber inside that clamps onto the handlebar. That sounds a little cheesy, but it's actually built pretty well and has been working great for him. I've never seen it slide or move or roll forward or back or, you know, excessively vibrate or anything. I think he paid a pretty penny for it, but it's working for him, but he's got a different bike and he had more free space on the handlebars to accommodate that. I don't. I literally have caps, you know, maybe a centimeter wide or a half-inch wide, you know, here and there. Nothing wide enough to get a clamp on that would be thick enough that would satisfy me that anything, you know, nothing bad was going to happen about it. The advantage of that is easy on, easy off. So as long as there was no wiring to it or anything, I mean, he could get to where he was going and just turn the thumb screw, take it off and throw it in a saddlebag or something, put it in his pocket, and no one was the wiser. So that wasn't for me, obviously, because of there's just lack of real estate on the handlebars. So I knew I was probably going to want to go with a mount that attached to the clutch or the brake perches. So if you ever seen this, it's, you know, a little vertical mount and there's some kind of a stem or stalk or a ball or some mounting up at the top. There's a couple holes through a block, and these go through the screw holes that would hold up your brake reservoir or clutch reservoir on your handlebars, or you know, for bikes that don't have those on the handlebars, it could be what holds the throttle assembly, you know, hand grip assembly in place, or for the clutch side. And they usually come with a little bit longer screws because the block is going to, you know, offset it between 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, depending on what you buy. And that was the mounting style that I was thinking of going with if I couldn't find anything else that would do the job. And the short story is I couldn't find anything else other than a clutch perch mount style that was going to work for me in this particular scenario. And B, not wanting to install a separate USB power port for use with the phone, noted in reason 2 that we addressed previously, I would want a USB connection integrated into the phone mount. That would make it more inconvenient to remove the phone when getting on and off the bike by having to remove a cable. So what am I talking about there? So if I got a phone mount that had power run to the mount and all it did was extend a female USB port, you know, on the bottom of the mount, a little weatherproof connection or something, so that I could plug a cable into it, a short charging cable, and then route that up to the phone, that would get me power. But I would still have a physical tether there that I would have to disconnect every time I got on or off the bike and wanted the phone. And also 2 more connections I would have to worry about backing out of the phone or backing out of the charger connection in the phone mount. That sounds a little particular or, you know, nitpicking, but I've had devices and cars and on other bikes where, you know, the more connections that you have loss, you have power loss, or it draws more power because of the connections, and it's just more things to go wrong, and you don't need distractions when you're riding, right? So the other thought I had was, you know, not wanting to use separate USB power, I could get a phone mount with integrated QI charging. You'd still have to run power to the mount itself, but there's no wire connected to the phone itself. The wireless charger would have to be able to provide enough power to both charge the phone and run the apps. So especially Google Maps or Waze, like I said before, because it's going to be, the display is going to be on the whole time that it's on, potentially for the whole ride. Unfortunately, that also means that the wireless charger can't draw so much power as to overload your bike's charging system or battery when used in conjunction with accessories such as extra lights, which I have, heated gear, which I have, and I'd also need the wireless charging to be smart enough not to overcharge or overheat the phone. So if you buy a Apple wireless charger or an Android wireless charger and you drop your phone on there, a lot of times these little things have tiny little fans built into them that keeps the charging portion cool, and they also sense when the phone is charged and they stop charging instead of just continually pushing power. You also want a wireless phone mount that has enough charging capacity that if your phone is in any kind of a case, it has enough EMF, electromagnetic force, so it's able to put out a magnetic field strong enough to get through the case and into the phone and charge it. So you don't want one that's just, 4 or 5 watts, because if you've ever put your phone on a wireless or plugged in charger that didn't have sufficient power, it says either low charging or can't charge because it's insufficient, use your manufacturer's charger, etc. So you want to make sure that the wireless charger has enough power to power the phone through whatever case you might use. And if the phone, wiggles just a tiny bit away and creates a little bit of an air gap, you still want it to charge. You don't want it to stop, and you don't want it to draw too much. So takeaway C was I wanted a phone mount that didn't require the use of a special case on the phone. And I'll throw some of those up on the screen if I can too, that would likely work with any phone that I might buy in the future. So again, some of these ones where it's a specialty mount where you have to put a special case on your phone, well, obviously that's made to fit your phone. So I mentioned before I had a Galaxy S8. If I all of a sudden switched to a Galaxy Note, I had to go back to that manufacturer and buy another case to hold that. And most of those right now do not include wireless charging. There's probably stuff in the works because everybody's jumping on this bandwagon just within like the past year. I just haven't seen it in any kind of quantity or from a variety of providers until this year. And competition drives innovation, and it ultimately drives quality. Once they get over the price wars, you're only going to be able to sell if you're getting good reviews and people actually like the product and recommend it to each other. So the other thing I didn't want to have to use is what I call rubber bands. So these, neoprene bands that they basically look like rubber bands or a spider web that you have to draw up and over the back of the mount to the front, and it's crisscrossing across the face of the phone. Inevitably, that's going to cover up something you want to see. And I like the idea of a safety net, but honestly, if the mount is engineered correctly and it truly does hold the phone, then it truly does hold the phone and you don't need rubber bands on it. This is my personal preference. So I also want the holder to engage the phone by slightly wrapping around the corners of the phone. And I didn't care for the mounts with like the little rubber cones or like little golf tee looking pegs that kind of came up, and what I just refer to as the friction fit family of phone mounts. So either the little rubber golf tees that kind of come in and grab from multiple angles, or there's a piece of plastic on each side with some foam rubber inside, and it just pushes as best it can against the side of it and compresses it. Those especially are more likely to, either block some of your buttons or push some of the buttons inadvertently or obstruct them so you couldn't get to them if you wanted to. So what I wanted was something that would kind of come up and, just kind of slightly just cup over the corner of the phone without blocking a camera or a light or a microphone or anything else that I'd want to get to. And I would also want to make sure that the phone mount didn't cover up any cameras. So I didn't want to cover up the forward-facing camera, and I didn't want to cover up the rear-facing camera, like by dropping it in something with a solid back with the squeeze sides that we talked about before, because what if I wanted to do some vlogging or something down the road, or just take pictures without getting off the bike or taking it out of the mount. So again, a lot of things that were just my personal preference while I was shopping. And basically, I obviously had a pretty good idea of what I was looking for by the time I had looked at all these other items, but I'd never really seen anything like what I just described. And again, that was until this year. So starting this year, the wireless cell phone mounts had gained a lot of traction. And starting primarily with the generic brands, and now we're starting to see some adoption by some of the name brands. They're a little slow to market. I'm not quite sure why. I guess they're just not tooled up for that kind of thing. There's one brand that has a mounting style that I don't care for that has clones of it, and also people are retrofitting the actual name brand with a wireless puck. And the manufacturer just hasn't seemed to put any importance on it right now. I haven't seen their offering yet, put it that way, but I would expect it's forthcoming probably by 2022. I would be surprised if they didn't have anything. So what did I do now that I had an idea what I wanted? So the first step in the journey was to research how I was going to put a mounting point on my bike. again, I had told you I was thinking about the clutch and brake perch. And so what I did was I went with a Ram brand, RAM, clutch perch or brake perch ball mount. And my thought here was they've been around a long time. Was sure I'd find a way to adapt the phone mount to the Ram ball mount somehow. And that would increase my options. And also, being as it's attached to the clutch perch and everything, or even the brake perch, I didn't want any problems. And for the sake of brevity, I actually chose to put it on the brake perch side, and I'll get to that again in a minute. So it's Ram ball mount. So what that means is the brake perch has like a little stem coming out of it, and the top of it is a ball. This part is steel or aluminum, and the ball is made of plastic, like rubber coated plastic. And Ram uses letter sizers for the ball size for the diameter, and the clutch brake perch is a size B, and letter size B in Ram is 1 inch diameter. So going with the solution also allows me to use Ram or other brands of compatible products, because other people make products that fit the Ram B form factor, the 1 inch diameter ball. And I could use those products to change the mounting height, position, etc. I could also mount other items to the ball, like a cup holder, GPS holder, Easy Pass, whatever. So I decided to put the Ram mount on the brake perch. And my thoughts are that this would put the camera in the default landscape position should I want to take pictures or record, help avoid inverted images, and would help ensure I wasn't playing with the phone too much while riding, since my throttle, sorry about that, guys, I would need my throttle hand to do it. So I may wind up moving it over to the clutch side so I can play with it more once I'm riding, but as I start out, I think I'm going to set it up just on the brake side and try and limit the amount I'm messing with it. Better mess with it when stopped, as opposed to take my eyes off the road for too long, get involved in what's going on the screen instead of concentrating on riding. So we'll see where that lands. I'll probably do a follow-up after, a fair amount of riding, and let you know how it's holding up and what I decided there. And the second step was to find a phone mount that like I previously described, that would also lend itself to a ball mount. So I didn't want to have to reinvent the wheel or engineer something that might not be as good as somebody that had created something purpose-built that would attach to it. So I saw a lot of offerings that had about 65% of what I was looking for, but I would still have to cobble something together, and they didn't quite make the cut. So I figured it was just going to have to be a matter of time, and I'd probably have to wait another year for the market to mature in this segment. And what I found on just looking on Amazon one day, I got a hit in the recommended portion of the search results. And for whatever reason, I wasn't seeing this item in the regular search results when I was deliberately putting in search criteria. It just came up in, hey, Amazon recommends area up there. And had enough varied and positive reviews over a long enough period of time that I'm fairly certain they were real and not from a bot or paid reviewers. And the thing that really caught my attention other than that is it appeared to be exactly what I wanted, and specifically stated it used a 1 inch ball mount. And there were others that were similar that did not specifically state they used a 1 inch ball mount. And I didn't want something that was close but not quite and have it wobble or slip or slide around. And it was a double ball mount, so it was highly articulated. You got nearly 360 degrees of movement in one direction, 360 degrees of movement in another direction. So you could put it just about anywhere you want. And again, going back to the Ram accessories, the double ball is, the stem portion is a double female. So a ball and a ball on the perch mount and a ball on the back of the phone mount. And you can get those in different heights from Ram. So you could put it above the windshield, below the windshield, etc. And the other thing about this one that I found on Amazon, it was under $40. So that's a pretty low barrier to entry, and I haven't lost a lot of money if it doesn't go well. I may wind up using this thing for a little while and go, what a piece of junk. I should have just waited for, somebody's name brand to come along and, have something better. So I wound up purchasing this thing from Amazon. So what we'll do is we'll split this into multiple parts, and the next part will be an unboxing, and we'll go through and we'll look at some of the assumptions that I had when I bought it, how they actually made it, how it's actually going to work for me, and what I might have to do to make this fit my application the way I want to use it. And then the third segment in the series will be actually mounting it on the bike. Hi everybody, and welcome back to Geezer Rider. This is part 2 in our 3-part segment on wireless charging cell phone motorcycle mounts. So if you haven't watched the first installment in the series, I suggest you go back and take a look to get better context. And again, what this is about is motorcycle phone mounts for motorcycles that have wireless charging or QI charging. So in the first segment, we went over, my particular criterion, what I was looking for, the research I did, and how I wound up with what I wound up with buying. And this installment, it will be the unboxing of the unit and my thoughts. And my thoughts are going to be about, the expectations I had for the unit, what I thought I could and couldn't do with it, how I think they'll fare, and what we'll be looking for in the third segment, which is installation and actual use. And then there will probably be a fourth installment down the road after, maybe even a full season of riding, where I do a follow-up and say how well it has or hasn't met expectations and how it held up over time. So let's go ahead and get right into it. And while I'm grabbing this, just a quick reminder, if you like this content, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more of it, hit the subscribe button. And also, if you hit the notification bell, you'll get alerted every time we post a new video to the channel. And we appreciate your support. So this is the box that the iMestu wireless double ball mount 1-inch ball came in. And there's the UPC. So one of the things I look for when I buy anything is how well the manufacturer packaged the device or product, because what that says to me is two things. One, how much they care for the product they made, and how much they care for your experience as a consumer or end user. Whether they give a whole lot of weighting to whether you're going to receive damaged goods or things are in good shape or not, or if they're just going to wing it. So if I get something and it's wrapped, just in a bubble wrap sleeve and thrown in the mail and they hope for the best, or, even if it's in a box and they don't put anything around it to keep it from getting abraded, what have you, or it's just in a little foamy wrap type thing, all that kind of thing just influences my perception of what they think the product is, the value they put on it, and what the value they put on me as a consumer. So these are things that I keep in mind. And the first thing you'll notice when you open this is, look at that packaging. Here is a piece of molded plastic, specific to the device, and obviously meant to keep the thing safe in transit. So this is big in my plus column. When I just, open up and first get that thing, it's like, wow, they wanted this thing to arrive unscathed. They care about the product. They care about my user experience, as a purchaser, my buyer's experience. So let's go ahead and get right here. So this is the device. This is the wireless charger. This is the wireless charging symbol that they choose to use. It's not the universal QI symbol. Here is the 1-inch ball mount we were talking about that should coordinate with the RAM mount. On the back is the on-off switch, and it is actually on for QI charging, on for USB charging. There's actually an integrated USB port, and we'll address that in a little while. In the center position is off. It has a little silicone rubber cover over it that's supposed to make it weather impervious. I actually did read a couple of negative reviews where that had come off, and that may happen if you address this switch every day or turn it on and off every day. My application, I'm actually going to leave it on in the QI position 99.99% of the time, because the power source that I'm going to choose is ignition switched. So I won't have to turn it off when I turn off the bike. There is also an LED light here on this side that illuminates when power is applied to the unit or it's turned on. We'll go ahead and take a look at the power supply cable. I have some comments about this. So let's go ahead and open it. And the first thing I notice is that it is meant to be hardwired to the battery, and it has spade lugs instead of ring terminals. This is an easy way out for the manufacturer because they don't know the diameter of the screws on top of your battery post. So this allows them to let you just push this in from the side and tighten it down without having to worry about the diameter of using a ring terminal, which means this end is actually encapsulated. It's formed over into a ring instead of open. These are kind of a pain in the butt in areas where the battery is placed in the, it's tight quarters and there's hard right angles to deal with. And what you wind up doing is having to basically hold this in all the way and then try and tighten it down with a screwdriver or, a ratchet socket. And that can be a little unwieldy. The gauge of the wire is probably sufficient to the task. We'll talk about power in a minute. The first thing I notice is this is not silicone wire. So my immediate concern is the insulation on this wire. The gauge looks sufficient. I can actually see the copper wire in the end of the spade lug terminals, and that looks sufficient. It's probably 24, 26, 28 gauge wire. But the insulation, it has to be indoor, outdoor rated or outdoor rated. So what does that mean? It should be temperature impervious, it should be water impervious, it should be UV impervious. Just by feeling it, I know it's not temperature impervious. It's going to wind up getting really stiff in the cold weather. That's not an issue as long as it has proper strain relief in the right places, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. The other resistance factors like UV light. So if it's, if you have the bike outside, this can degrade in the sun, and only time is going to tell. And what happens is when the insulation degrades over time, it actually can open cracks up, make area for a potential short, or get corrosion to make the thing not work or draw more power, and just be a problem. So it could be a more modern material that I'm just not intimately familiar with at the moment, but I've worked with electronics for many, many decades, and my first thought is that this wire might not be up to the task long term. So I'm not sure what my expectations are for how long I'm going to get use out of this, but we'll see. After a full hot summer, and we've had quite a few here, and I've been out in the sun, and this will get direct sunlight. We'll find out one way or the other. In spite of the shortcomings of the spade lug terminals, what I did notice immediately was they included a fuse holder in here. So this is good for anybody that has to hardwire it to an unfused connection. I'm actually going to hardwire to a fused connection in the mounting scenario that I have in mind. So this won't come into play for me, but for anybody else, it has a microfuse, so it's smaller than the standard fuses that you'd see in 1970s, 1980s vehicle before we changed to spade lug connectors, spade fuses. This is called a barrel fuse, and this is actually a mini barrel fuse, and the micro barrel fuses are the ones you see like in Christmas lights, the ones that are teeny tiny. They're less than a centimeter long. And what's nice about this is that this ensures that should anything go wrong with the device, let's hope it doesn't, but should anything go wrong with the device, the fuse theoretically will go before it does damage to your battery or charging system. And to those guys' credit, they actually, we're getting into what else came in the kit at this point, but they did actually include a spare fuse as well. Should you make a mistake while wiring it up and blow a fuse, you don't have to run off to the store. They're giving you a spare. Pretty classy move. That's rare these days. They usually don't give you anything more than what you need. So what else is in the kit? So we talked in the first part in the video series that I chose the Ram ball mount, size B as in ball. which is 1 inch in diameter. They include a 1 inch in diameter ball mount that could handlebar clip. And while this diameter looks small, they include spacers that are of a thinner diameter to accommodate larger bars, and even do without the spacer altogether and put in a rubber sleeve. This thing is also clamped down via a Allen bolt on the side, and they actually include the Allen wrench. Also another classy move. Just kind of shows appreciation for the consumer. I spoke in the first video in the series that one of the reasons that I selected this was in the description. They described the item as a 1 inch, specifically as a 1 inch ball mount and a double ball mount. So double ball mount, this is what I was just trying to get across to you in the first segment, where there are 2 female openings on the spacer. And I said that these come in different heights. You can order them from RAM, and you know, there are obviously people that clone them. This is a clone in different heights. So depending on where you mount it, you can get it, you know, a big one to get you above the windshield, a shorter one to get you below the windshield, etc. So this opens up via the thumb screw and goes over the ball mount, and then you simply tighten it up. And I'm just going to give a little tiny bit of friction to this, and I'll tell you why in a second. So if you can see that little gap through the back here, it's at an angle because I don't have the mount in the other end. But what I wanted to point out to you was I barely have any tension at all on this. I'm just going to get it finger tight, and it's pretty stable. You know, it's not wagging back and forth. It's moving with me. It's not moving outside of the rotation of the ball. So when this is clamped tight, it should stay stable. And that was what I was looking for. And I put a micrometer on the RAM ball mount, which was advertised at 1 inch, because most things today are metric. And I was wondering, you know, how close does it really need to be? Because obviously this thing comes from overseas and is some sort of metric ball size. But put in a micrometer on the RAM mount. It's actually slightly under 1 inch, and this is about the same. And it is a slightly, it's obviously plastic, but has a rubberized feel to it for grip, and it's about the right diameter. So, you know, kudos to them for making it compatible, either by design or by coincidence. So how does this thing work? You know, we've gone through. Let's finish with what's included. Sorry about that. So we already talked about the handlebar mount. We talked about the spacer that's double ball mount. They also include what I call the rubber bands or the spider web. And let me get my little old Samsung 5S here as a crutch. The idea is that this thing's going to slip over here. Obviously, this round hole is to go over the ball, and then this thing is going to stretch up the back side and over the top. And the idea is once you get everything on there, this thing will stretch up over the top and the side of the phone like this, right? So that you have belt and suspenders holding this thing in place. My objection to this is that if this thing is engineered properly to hold the phone in place, this should be completely unnecessary and only there to satisfy your OCD. So we're going to find out over time whether this is just a customer preference item that they threw in as a you know, freebie and just because they're nice people, or if it winds up being necessary. The reason I have an issue with it wind up being necessary is you saw how I folded it down. So here's an alert light here that it might obstruct. We've got a camera here that it might obstruct depending on how it comes down. We've got USB ports down here that might be partially obstructed depending on how it comes down. And there are microphones on the top of the phone here. And again, a small pinhole microphone cover on the bottom there. So I prefer not to have to rely on them. They also included 4 zip ties or wire ties in the package. Again, you know, class act. They don't know how many you are or aren't going to need when you do your installation, but you know, kudos to them for throwing it in the box. So let's double back to the unit itself, which is our area of focus. So a little bit about this before we get into the mechanism. You have two choices. I mentioned the switch before, and it has a silicone cover on it. And again, I read some reviews about this popping off after continued use, somebody that had to turn it off and turn it on. I don't know whether their experience was unique or not. They were the only post that said so, but I could see that happening. It has a bit of a siliconized feel to it, which is what you would expect to be here for constant use. But it's a little more rigid than that. So I could see where this might fatigue over time. My application, that's probably not going to matter because again, I'm going to have an ignition switch source. When I turn the bike off, this will go off. So there's off, on for wireless charging, and then off for wire charging if you want to use the USB port to charge. So, why am I even bothering to mention the USB port for charging? Twofold. The reason I say is because the whole thing is about wireless charging, but twofold. One is if you do a wire charge, if you actually come out of here and go right into the phone, that's a full 5 amps. Should your charging system and your battery be able to support it and you need a lot of charge real quick, it can do it by hardwiring. The other thing is I have a couple of things like extra batteries on my bike. I have a little USB LED flashlight, cute little thing. I ordered a bunch of them, handful of them off Amazon a year or two ago, and used them as stocking stuffers and stuff. And you just charge them up and you throw them in your glove box and forget about it until you have a flat tire or whatever else is going on. You have at least a little bit of illumination. It's small enough you can hold it in your mouth or put it behind your ear, find a way to do something with it, and have a light source. And if you charge it like once every 3 months, basically once a quarter, twice a year, it seems to hold a charge pretty well. You could plug that into here. So just a couple of quick examples. Again, that is 5 amps at full draw. We'll let you draw full 5 amps, probably about the maximum capability of this wire. So just be judicious about what you plug into there and what your expectations are in there. Don't plug a jump box into it if your battery's dead, for example. And that leads neatly into the other part of the thing, which is power capabilities, capacities, and utilization. So I already mentioned that this USB port is capable of 5 amps. Very, very significant, big draw on your charging system if you use it all. The QI system is rated at 18 watts. Competitive products I saw that were a slightly different layout than this were roughly 15 watts. And this was 18 watts, and I viewed that as a good thing. Well, why do I care that it's an extra 3 watts of power? The reason is if you have any kind of case on your phone, the QI charger is basically just a coil of wire which emits a magnetic field, which is EMF, electromotive force. And the more electromotive force you have, the more you can get into the back of the phone where the coil is that charges the battery through distance. So you have two distances. One is the fit of the phone against the charger itself, and depending on protrusions you have, like the camera sticks up high on this one. I've seen custom cases that have ups and downs, and we'll talk about the detriment of a valley in the middle here in a minute. But the thicker the phone case, the more power you need here in order to get a full charge in here. And I think most people have encountered at some point, they plug in their charger or they drop the phone onto a QI charger and it says, hey, slow charging or insufficient charge, use factory provided charger, etc. So what you want is something that can actually charge through a case without drawing so much power it overheats or puts a detrimental draw on your charging system or your battery. The other thing is you want to make sure that the device has overcharging, circuitry protection, which this one said it did on Amazon. And why do I say, well, this one said it did on Amazon? Because the one thing you didn't see me pull out of that package is an instruction manual. Okay, so they're either saving money, or it was a packaging oversight, or they're not wanting to substantiate their claims in print. One of the above. Most everything about this thing is straightforward. I mean, honestly, like the only thing I would have a question about is switch position 1 or switch position 2, the QI. Is one the, external USB and 2 QI, or is 1 QI and 2 USB. That's about the most of it. I mean, everything else about like wiring it to the bike is going to be bike specific, and they couldn't take responsibility for that anyway. So I understand that. So that's enough about the power. I did say it was 18 watts. So E equals I times R, W is I times E. So W is wattage, I is amperage, and E is voltage. So if we take W, 18 watts, divided by E, which is 12 volts, we get an I, which is current, of 1.5 amps. So at 18 watts of charging, this thing draws 1.5 amps. On my current bike, that's only a problem if I'm using my heated gear and all my extra lighting and everything along with that. For my little 750 I used to have, the one in the picture here, that could actually be significant over time, because this charging system was really never meant to do anything more than run the bike and the lights that were included on the bike. So if you go back to the heated gear segment or a couple of the other, electronics related videos that I did, we talk in depth, probably ad nauseum, about your charging system, its capabilities, and the draw on there, and how you might have to toggle back and forth between things. So if you have a charging system that's already maxed, don't add something else onto it that's going to draw more power, or be prepared to not run something in order to run something new. Just a cautionary note. So let's get into how this thing works. And again, I have a Samsung Galaxy S8. This is an S5, and it is actually a little shorter vertically than my S8, but it's just about the same width as the S8. So this is a good test bed. So how does this thing work? You start off by squeezing the two sides to expand all these paws. And again, you remember me telling you I was looking for something that would just come slightly over the top and cover the corner, to hold it in place. And that's what this style does, instead of the little rubber posts and things we talked about in the first video. So I hold this in the general vicinity of being, I expanded it obviously more than it needed to be. And when I press the phone back against this button, it'll collapse. So what I'm going to do here is take the time to address something I mentioned earlier in this same video, and that is if you have a case that is high everywhere but in the center, so there's an indentation, and this side are elevated, it might not hit that button, and that might be a problem for you trying to get it to fit. So that would be case dependent. But anyway, this one works. So we're going to go ahead and put that on there and just push it back a little bit, and you can hear it ratcheting down until it gets to the point where it's hugging the phone. And it's actually in there pretty secure. You do have to let it walk down and ratchet in place, and I'm just going to give it some really hard shakes and bumps, trying to simulate, going over road hazards and stuff, and it is pretty secure. And I don't have any travel in the lateral direction or the longitudinal direction. It is in there rock solid. Very impressed. So why am I not smiling a little more? And I'll tell you why in a second. So first of all, let's address, my hope that I could get this thing to be held in place at all four corners. So it was held this way, it was held this way, and it was held this way, and not have to use the rubber band thing. I think we're there. I think this met the bill. And looking at the way this clamps down, I'm not sure how you would utilize this without stretching the rubber part over the phone, obstructing things, because it would have to clear this corner to mount. So it couldn't really be underneath there, right? It would have to come over the edge and clear all that, and just, be completely obtrusive. So I'm going to give this, at the moment, until we test it more, an A+ for, holding the phone in place. What I'm not going to be able to, and I'm also going to give it an A+ for leaving the USB port clear, basically the 1.5 millimeter, earphone jack clear. I can see the microphone input on the top, and the microphone pinhole opening on the bottom. So those are clear, and all my side buttons are unobstructed. So that functionality is all A+ until it proves otherwise in a long-term test. Where it fails, and it's not a failing of the device, it's a failing of me not being able to see this thing in person before choosing it, is that it obstructs the rear camera, which on my Samsung Galaxy S8 is actually higher resolution than my forward-facing camera. So I won't be able to use this for the kind of vlogging that I thought I could, but I can show, instead of showing a rider's perspective, I can show the rider. You know, you can see my helmet bobbing around, and you know, I can still make a video, just not what I thought. But the ones that are open here, the other styles, and I'll show pictures of those in the first video in this series. It's not worth the way they mount. Like, I don't care for the way they mount to the extent I'd rather give up the camera. So, you know, takeaway for the engineers that are working on this thing, if they find a way to keep the QI puck in here to charge it and bring this area down a little bit, or at least notch it in so that the camera is unobscured, that would be a plus, and I would probably buy that. And it was addressed in the first video in the series, but I'll mention again here, barrier to entry on this thing was less than $40, $39.95 for this. So I figured even if it didn't work for me or didn't work long term, I wasn't out that much money. I would learn things, and then I would get something that I wanted. And obviously time marches on and things improve in quality. So whatever I bought down the road would be even higher quality. And I also mentioned the reviews that I found thus far. Nobody said the little plastic corners broke off. Nobody said the phone popped out. I had one guy that said something was a little bit loose, but he never lost the phone. So the other items are going to be addressed a bit more in the third video in this series, and that is where I actually mount it on a specific bike, my bike, and then we do some road tests, and then there'll be a fourth installment, which is a long-term test. And that takes us, anyway, that takes us back to this connection here. So I mentioned in the first video series my buddy with the RAM mount, you know, the clamp-on thing that he could take on and off with ease. If this is hardwired to the bike, it's hardwired to the bike. So if I want to use that ball mount that I've got on the clutch perch for something else, like a GPS, a water bottle, mount a GoPro or whatever, what am I going to do with this thing that's hardwired to the bike? What if I get somewhere where it's kind of a dicey area and I just don't want somebody to come up and clip the wire off and, you know, take the charger or damage it or something? I want to hide it. I need a way to disconnect it. So what I will probably do is install a waterproof connector somewhere in line with this so that I can take it off and put this away, and, you know, even run a different accessory or something off of that if I so choose. So again, this is all personal preference. I'm just running through my needs and preferences and what my installation is going to be like, and you can do your homework and figure out how it will or won't work for you. So I hope this has given you some information. Again, I didn't find any kind of a review like this online. Ours tend to go long normally and into a greater depth of detail, but the reason for that is if I find somebody that's already dug into this, like Ryan Fortnine, if you're familiar with his channel, if he's already done a video on something like this, it's pretty thorough. It doesn't need to be hit again. So when I dive into gear, like the heated gear segment, for example, I found a lot that was left out of the other videos while I was making my decisions. And, you know, time is precious, money is precious, and riding time is precious. So I want to make sure that I'm poised for the best riding experience possible, which is always the end goal, making the most prudent use of my money as possible along the way. So I'm doing the research, I'm taking the hit for you guys and getting all this out of the way so that when you go to spend your hard-earned money, you have a reasonable expectation of what you're getting yourself into, at least until I do the long-term review. Hi everybody, moving back to the installation portion of this. As I mentioned, your installation is going to be a bit more bike specific, but I had talked about how I didn't have a lot of horizontal free space on my handlebar to attach the clamp mount on the level part of the bar. As you can see, it's all obscure, and I would have to put it on the downward portion of the bar, which wouldn't be desirable. So this is the clutch perch from Ram that I was talking about, and I'm just shining a little extra light on it to show you how it mounts. Again, bike specific, as would be the ultimate wiring connection. There is a cigarette lighter adapter that is roughly in this position here that I'm pointing to in the fairing. It's a batwing fairing, so the bars move with the fairing. So if I mount it that way, I don't have to worry about transient motion between the bars and the body of the bike. Everything will move together, and that cigarette lighter adapter is fused and has sufficient amperage to run the cell phone charger. So what we'll do first is we'll mount the stem on there. So basically just undo the wing nut wide enough to get it on top of the ball here. See if I can get my arm out of the way for you. And the top has to be held open enough to slip the ball in that's on the back of the mount as well. So that's a little bit of a juggling act to get it correct, but you should be able to drop it in, snap it in, a little bit of tension, and right now obviously there's complete mobility in a lot of directions. So once you get it in the general area that you want, start tightening up the thumb screw. Put a little friction on there, and pretty quickly it starts grabbing. And what's interesting is that the bottom ball for the mount, the ball mount, you know, for the clutch perch, and the ball for the phone holder itself are actually about equal tension, which is what you want. You don't want one to be slipping around and the other to be snug, because that means that you're going to have uneven tension. You're going to have to over tighten one to get the other to hold. So I'll move this around to a position that I want it in, and I will probably face the thumb screw to some degree away from me so I don't have to look at it. And I will put the phone in how I want. So I'm probably going to put it in horizontally. So I'll turn it this way. And this was my nitpick about the placement of the wire cable. If you look, it's coming out in this direction. So in order to get it to point down, I'm going to have to go, you know, alongside here. But I'll tuck the wire down. There's a little gap here between the brake reservoir and the handlebar. So I'll just bring it through there and then down through the, you know, replace these wire ties, put the wire under there first, and then rewire tie it back with the wire, and obviously be a little bit cleaner than this. But no matter how you slice it, even if you wire tie the wire to the stem here, you're going to see a little bit of cable. There's just really no way around it. So let me just tighten it up for demonstration purposes. And you squeeze that open. You put your phone in there. Once your phone's pressed back against it, the corners all grasp around the phone as was shown in the prior video. So that's really it. I mean, it couldn't be much simpler. Once you get it where you want it, you can apply just a little bit more tension. I have grabbed the phone mount with the phone in it and shaken it all over and pounded my fist on the desk with it in there, as well as holding the stem, and it didn't budge. It didn't move. I was very impressed. So only time will tell if that's going to hold up and continue to work. And of course, we have to review the ability for it to charge while you're moving. But again, the rear, let me loosen this up a little bit. The rear camera is completely obstructed. There's going to be no way for me to use video capability there. So that was a little disappointment. That was an assumption I had that maybe this would allow that. And like the Ram X Grip, you know, where it's the two things with the rubber golf tee looking things on the end, might clear the camera area. So that might be, if somebody absolutely had to be able to take rear camera facing video, they could use some other phone holder to achieve that. However, it doesn't prohibit me from using the forward facing, so I can do a you know, showing the rider, looking into the helmet type thing. And realistically, if I wanted to, I wouldn't know how it was positioned, but I could get a taller stem and put it up higher and turn it around the other way and take video that way. I think honestly, if I want to take a lot of rider perspective video, I'll get a GoPro or some other, you know, purpose-built camera for that. Right now, this will be for infotainment and also, you know, using internet-based GPS like Google Maps, Waze, which now are kind of the same thing. So I hope this additional information was helpful. And what I'll do, instead of doing a separate installation video, is we'll package this all together into one video, and then I'll do a separate review after I've lived with it for a little while, and we'll see how it holds up. Thanks. Hi everybody, this is the next installment in the wireless phone charger video. This one is bike specific. I gave generic information in the prior video, and the only reason I'm creating this is just to show you the phone, you know, mounted and wired as it were. And just if you have a 2016 or, you know, a Rushmore edition Harley touring bike, this should work for you. I don't know about the shark nose fairings and the road glides, you know, the glide series, but for the Electra glides, this is a 2016 Harley Davidson Electra Glide Ultra Classic, otherwise known in alphabet soup as FLHTCU. So again, here is my brake side perch mount, and as I mentioned before, I put it over on this side to deliberately try and keep me from playing with it too much while riding. I'd rather just, you know, force myself to wait for a stoplight or pull over or something to mess with it. If I decide that's too inconvenient and I actually do want to do a little more with it, I can either move the perch mount over from the brake side over to the clutch, or just add an additional one on the clutch side. I think this thing was 14 bucks or something, so I may just add an additional one on the clutch side. It's a little of a cluttered look, you know, it looks a little out of place with nothing on it, but I don't think it's really too unattractive or too obtrusive. Most of my controls are, you know, black, so it's not standing out too much. You know, if it was shiny and chrome, that would be a problem. So again, what I mentioned in the other video, what I want to take advantage of is the cigarette lighter adapter that is built into the fairing. And if you watched my heated gear series, you'll know that I had intended originally to run my heated gear off of this port. So there's a plug-in adapter from Gerbing and other places where it converts cigarette lighter to the little round connector that heated gear connects to. And I found in short order that the plug they provided had too much spring tension on the center terminal and kept backing out. And rather than, you know, trying to find the spring or shorten the one they gave me or stretch it out and shorten it, whatever, and just keep playing with it, I decided to go a different direction. I just hardwired to the battery. The reason I was choosing this port was it does have sufficient amperage. Even had enough amperage, obviously, to run the heated gear if I want to, and it is also ignition switched. So because of that, I want to use the wiring that's going to this. I'm not going to try and use a plug-in adapter, again, based on the experience I had with the heated gear, but I want to use the wiring that goes to this that's inside the fairing to power the rechargeable phone holder, or I'm sorry, the wireless phone holder. And the reason for that is this is obviously very close to where the phone is going to be mounted, and also it is ignition switched. So when the bike is off, the power to the wireless mount will be off. And while that sounds kind of inconvenient, one of the negative comments about the phone holder that I selected was that the little rubber cover that goes on the back of it over the switch, the little rocker switch, which in position 1 is the wireless charging, and position 2 is the USB port on it. So when the bike is off, it's off, and I won't be operating that switch, so theoretically the cover won't wear out. And I also can't accidentally leave it on. It shouldn't draw any power if it was left on accidentally anyway, other than the little LED light saying that it's on. But in the past few years that I've been riding the bike, there's nothing I wanted to power with the bike turned off anyway. Usually if I wanted to power something, I needed to charge my phone while I was walking around or something. And to be honest, I have a separate lithium battery, a little rechargeable lithium battery that I carry in my tour pack that I can operate, whatever off of. I can charge the cell phone or something else. So I won't be detailing removal of the fairing, or for those of you that are going to hard mount to the battery, I'm not going to be detailing taking the seat off. I happen to have mine off coincidentally enough during this because I just put in a new battery, and I'm also doing some additional LED lighting work. But there are plenty of videos out there on YouTube of very high quality and detail that show how to take the fairing off that I think you'll be good enough. What I will be pointing out to you is where the wiring to this comes through on the front side of the fairing. So once the fairing cover is off, you're going to see like this milky white plastic thing, the base enclosure, or whatever you want to call it, where the speaker mounts to, and the wiring for the cigarette lighter adapter passes through that. And yes, I know the bike is filthy right now, but since I'm working on it, I didn't want to bother cleaning it first. And I'll show you how we're going to tap into that, the connectors I chose and why I chose them, and we'll get it wired up. And obviously, as you can see in the reflection, I'm recording with the phone that I'll be mounting, so I'm never going to be able to show you a picture of this phone in operation on the bike, and my old phone, my dummy mock-up phone, doesn't have wireless charging capability in it, so I can just clamp it into the holder, but you're not going to see it actually charging a phone. So we'll see what we can do about that. Maybe I can borrow an iPhone or something from somebody and just clip it in there and just show that it gets power. I've already tried the phone. It charges quite well. Didn't seem to have any problem at all starting off. I know in some cases, like the wireless phone charger in your vehicle, or even like the little pucks you have on your countertop at home that you lay the phone down on, they seem to be a bit position sensitive, and either by design or by coincidence, this thing must have lined up perfectly, and it just immediately started charging, and it said it was fast charging. So obviously it was putting forth sufficient power. I haven't put an ammeter on it yet. It's rated at 1.5 amps. I can't see if it were to exceed that, it would exceed it by much. So I don't think we really need to do an ammeter draw test on it. It's just something you have to have in the back of your mind when you're tallying up your load on your electrical system. Hey, I could be, if my phone was nearly dead and I was using the USB charging, or I'm sorry, no, just the wireless charging, that's 18 watts. That's 1.25 amps. I think I made a mistake in the earlier video and said it was 1.5 amps. It's actually the calculation of 18 watts divided by 12 volts is 1.25 amps. But you got to add that 1.25 amps to, your auxiliary lighting, your LED accent lights, your aftermarket audio accessories, and heated gear or anything like that you have plugged in a GPS, and tally all that up and just realize, if you have 7 amps available, 15 amps available, whatever it is, and you run that constantly, your charging system is, working really hard. So you want to come just south of that. You'd rather be running at about 75% capacity. So almost nobody runs their heated gear on full blast the entire time. And you shouldn't, even just to get it warmed up, maybe medium, but you should be able to run all your heated gear on low and be warm enough. But again, that's a different video we already covered, so we don't need to go into that any more in depth here. Just remember that if you are, mounting this phone on a bike without a little charging system, and I mentioned in the other video, I had a little 750 Honda way back when, and its charging system was really just meant to run the lights on the bike and the ignition on the bike, and that was about it. There really wasn't anything left over for any accessories. So I would have to be really cautious about putting anything on there that drew, more than like this, like 1.25 amps would be, about all I would want to put on that. Obviously not a concern with, the Harley, the Rushmore series has an enhanced charging system. So let's go ahead, I'll get the fairing off and we'll expose the wires and we'll jump into the next part. All right, everybody, we got the fairing removed. Just once more for orientation, there is the cigarette lighter adapter, And as we walk around to the front of the fairing, you can see where the wire passes through the back of the plastic housing that I was indicating was the enclosure for the right front speaker. And there is a connector on the back of the cigarette lighter adapter there, and we're not going to disturb that. And the wiring comes up and goes into this harness here and works its way around back down to the main area, so it's getting switched ignition. What we're probably going to do is tap into this right about, sorry we lost focus there, right about this location here, just before this strain relief, and take advantage of the boot. So I'm going to go ahead and get into it and cut that connection to tap in there, and I'll put in a waterproof connection and leave that there. So why am I not just going to hardwire it, solder it in and leave it in case it ever goes bad, in case I ever choose another device to put there, etc. And I may even choose to put two connectors on there so I can run a wire to either side. But what I'm going to do is leave enough length on the phone mount so that if I want to move it over to the other side, I can. And as you can see here, there's plenty of areas underneath here to bring the wire through. Sorry, let's get around there. And underneath the fairing or through the fairing to come up the handlebar clamp or the handlebar mount, just come out that side exit. Again, this is batwing fairing, so the handlebar moves with the fairing, and I can just come up through those wire ties up the handlebar and then up to the mount. Word of caution here, if you're going to be cutting any wires, especially something that is going to be supplying power, either pull the main fuse or disconnect the battery, or at a bare minimum just ensure 100% that the bike is off. And if you just want to validate that nobody messed with the thing before you start getting in there and cutting wires or anything, you can even take a multimeter and stick the positive lead on the center conductor in the cigarette lighter mount and the negative lead on the exterior there. You can't really see the positive lead the way I'm holding this too well, but just to make sure there's no voltage with it turned off. I know for a fact that there isn't because I've already done so. So we'll get in here, we'll get our connectors on, and what I'll do is I'll do a quick segment on the connectors that I'm going to use and indicate why I use them and what I'm going to do with the phone itself. All right, so I'm going to be mostly out of frame for this so I can show you the connectors that I bought off Amazon. You can get something similar under a variety of names. This is the UPC that came on the connectors I got from Amazon. They do come with pretty decent instructions in color, believe it or not. So not too bad. And the reason I'm showing you this is basically they're a little fussy to make if you don't normally work with electrical connections, but it's fairly simple. And I go a little step further than they do in the construction process. But basically what you do is you have a connector that's female, so this is going to accept male pins in on this side. Your wire's going to come out the back side. This is obviously a rubberized boot, and then there'll be male pins on the inside of this, and the wire will come out the back side, and they go together like this. They're a little big for the gauge of wire that's being used because it's meant to be hard mounted. So this little slot here, there's usually like a little rectangular piece of plastic that you can slide and lock this into on a car or bike or whatever. Obviously we're not going to do that. It's going to be hanging there. They're not that heavy, and the gauge of wire that we're hanging off of this on the power side of it is more than sufficient. So it's not going to be trying to break the wire, and the wire that's going to be attached to it to go to the phone mount, etc., is such that it can handle the weight. I'll put one of these inside the fairing, at least maybe two. The reason for two would be I could use one for the left side, one for the right side, and deal with them independently. And I'll also have another one of these connectors outside the fairing in case I ever want to remove the mount for some reason, you know, put it away if I'm at a rally or something and I'm just concerned about somebody messing with it. I want to be able to quickly disconnect it without having to take anything apart, or should it go bad and I want to replace it. So I'll actually have two. So why have the one inside the fairing in case, you know, if I'm already going to have one outside the fairing? That way I can remove the entire assembly if I want to, including what will become an intermediate cable between the plug that's inside the fairing getting power, then comes out, and another plug that goes up to the phone mount holder itself. That way, if you remove it, there's, you know, not anything still hardwired into the bike in the back of the fairing. So the way this works is, you know, pretty obviously what you do is assemble it according to the instructions. There are even these little rubber gaskets that go in around the pins. So not only is the housing itself waterproofed when put together, but then those rubber seals go in the backside and seal the wires, you know, the insulation around the wires to the housing so water can't infiltrate that way. Not too big a deal inside the fairing. That's not dust impervious, but it's fairly water impervious. But outside the fairing, you definitely don't want water getting into an electrical connection and causing corrosion. The connectors themselves are actually a fairly narrow gauge. This could probably handle up to wire gauges. The higher the number, the smaller the wire. So these are probably 24, 26 gauge wire, maybe even as low as 22. And the pins, you know, look small, but that's sufficient to handle, more than sufficient to handle the 1.25 amps we're anticipating. So if you go on Amazon or, you know, look around, you can find a variety of these, sometimes a little bit smaller. I just happen to already have these. And though I wish they were a little bit less robust, obviously this tail doesn't need to be this long for my purposes. That's just that way, I think, because of this mounting thing. But I obviously have plenty, so I'm going to go ahead and use them. And I would suggest using some kind of waterproof connector. Don't just use a standard, what's called a Molex connector that doesn't have any waterproofing. I also wouldn't use anything larger than this. I'm usually very conscientious about clutter on the bike. I think this is black, so it's going to be fairly hidden unless you're looking for it. But, you know, it's one more thing to be clacking around against something. I'll wire tie it either with a regular wire tie or Velcro, depending on how often I think I might need to remove it. I might use Velcro tie downs just to keep it from rattling around or being obtrusive. But you get the general idea. I just wanted to show you they're out there. I think this whole bag of connectors was pretty cheap. I'm sure I paid less than $10 for it. And I've seen them even cheaper from a variety of people. You know, like a lot of this stuff, it comes packaged, you know, from company A, but you see company B, C, and D, and 50 others all having the same exact product with basically the same instructions, you know, from overseas, quite obviously, if you read the verbiage here. So that's the connecting mindset that we're using, and these are the connectors that we'll be using. I mentioned about cutting off power. What I didn't mention was which color was positive and which was negative. So coming out of the back of the cigarette lighter, the center pin, which is positive, is purple, and the outer ring, which is negative, is the black wire. So when we tap into there, we're going to be using purple. This is from the bike's wiring itself, you know, the stock wiring. Purple will be the positive feed, and negative will be black will be the negative feed, and whatever wire choice, you know, we have on the phone mount itself, or, you know, whatever wires we use to attach to the connectors, we're going to have to identify them, either, you know, put a mark on them or see that one wire's ribbed and one wire's not, to keep positive and negative straight. You do not want to get that wrong. All right, and let's move on to the installation. Okay, so I'm going to try and keep my arms out of the way so this isn't overly obstructed. So again, we're going to tap into the wire that's feeding the cigarette lighter adapter. It is purple for positive, black for negative, and we're going to tap into it in this segment here. The reason is up above, it combines with another wiring harness. So we could open this up and tuck this away. There's two reasons I really don't want to do that. One is the GPS transponders here, and they've obviously deliberately routed wires around it, so I don't want to place my connectors such that they're obstructing the GPS transponder with any wires. And I think if we go here, we can then route the connectors this over here, and either for the left or the right side, doesn't matter, and have them tucked out of the way, and it won't interfere with anything else that's needed for service. So what we're going to do is we're going to slice down this, exposing the wire. We're not going to cut it completely off because we're going to need to reuse it. And what we'll do is we'll cinch it back together with wire ties. They put this on there. It's not waterproofing, obviously, because it's open at the top. But the reason they put it on there is because it's carrying power. They don't want it to become abraded and short out against anything. So we're going to reuse that. We'll just put some little wire ties on it when we're done. So let's go ahead and clip down the side of that insulation, being careful not to clip the wire itself. And as a reminder, make sure that you have either the main fuse pulled or the battery disconnected, or in this case, this is ignition switch. Make sure the ignition is completely off. Should be blatantly obvious, but it never hurts to just, mention it and have everybody double check one more time. So let's work our way down the boot and expose this wire. And try and keep it fairly straight. What I want is to expose enough that I can cut the wire and create a heat shrink zone to protect it. I think that is just about good enough. I'm going to go a little more just to give me a little bit more play when I'm working. Again, this is a little more elaborate than, wiring it directly to the battery. I've been dealing with electronics and such for quite a number of years, so I'm comfortable doing this sort of thing. Although I could have been a little neater about cutting the insulation here. But anyway, and I did say that I make the pin connection a bit more complex than what they have in the instructions, and that's because I choose to actually solder the connections. I did that for the Kuryakin saddlebag hinge reflector replacement lights. They're little LED lights that go in place to the reflectors, and they wanted you to hardwire it all the way up to the battery, which was dumb because then you couldn't remove the saddlebags from the bike for cleaning or maintenance or whatever without either cutting the wire or just cutting all your wire ties and removing it all the way up to their control module. So I installed those weatherproof connections that we showed in the previous video for that, and I'll do a review of those sometime in the future. But again, those pins are soldered, not just crimped, and that's a good idea if the wire gauge is small, which in the case of those, the wire gauge was extremely small, or just to ensure the maximum electrical conductivity without having to worry about corrosion causing resistance. So now that we have our purple and black wire exposed, again, purple is going to be positive and black is going to be negative. We're going to choose where to make our cut, and then our wires for the connectors will come off of here. My thought process is we will go ahead and route them off into this gap over here, and either wire tie them to this metal frame or wire tie them to the GPS cable, probably more likely the frame, to keep them from knocking around and just have some phantom noise in the fairing. That way they're out of the way, they're not interfering with anything else that we would need to get to, and they're in a more weather impervious location. Even though they're weatherproof connectors, might as well just be belt and suspenders about it. So we're going to go ahead and cut these two wires in the middle so that we have a lot of room for play. And what we will wind up doing is putting heat shrink on here. And I think what we may actually do is a scab-in wire, and a scab-in wire is where you break the insulation but not the wire, So you cut all the way around the wire on one side, cut all the way around the wire on the other side, exposing the wire on both sides. So it'll be a bare spot here, a bare spot here. And then you tin it with solder, and then you wrap the wires that you're going to connect around it, and then solder that. The only problem with that is then we don't have a way to get heat shrink on there, and I'm not a big fan of electrical tape. So I think we're going to go ahead and break the connection and get heat shrink slid down onto either side to protect it, and you'll see that in a minute, and move forward that way. So let's go ahead and cut these two wires. Then we'll strip the ends, and we will solder them, and we'll slide heat shrink up onto them before we do anything else. So let me pause for a moment, get all that ready, and we'll go from there. I'm not going to teach you how to strip wires and stuff. You can learn that in another video. So for the sake of brevity, we'll go through a couple extra steps. Okay, so we've done a little work here, and I spared you the boring details of how to solder, how to heat shrink, and ultimately how to wire tie. There are other videos out on the internet and YouTube that can help you with that. So again, what I did was, this is the cigarette lighter power feed. It comes up this harness. I tapped into it. You can see where I've wire tied and heat shrinked. I had to split this rubberized sheath down to about here in order to bring my wire that I'm going to be using as my feed for the phone mount. I had to split into that sheath. So I cut it from there up, and I put a piece of heat shrink over it to bind it, and also wire tied it in place. I also decided two other things at this time. One was I wasn't going to do a quick disconnect inside, since this is already fused, and I've got waterproof connectors on the other side, which I'll show in just a moment. And the other, that would also, not having the connectors in place here would also save some real estate if I was going to put in an aftermarket amp or other things up here, make it easier to service to in the future. So I also decided to go ahead and run power over to the clutch side in case I want to move the phone mount over to that side, or run a different accessory in the future, some kind of GoPro thing, or who knows what, it'll already be there. So I'm going to put another perch mount, Ram perch mount over there. Like I said, they're 14 bucks from Cycle Gear. How can you go wrong? Free shipping if you do ship to store too. So went ahead and routed that over. Obviously it hasn't been wire tied in place yet, and I have left a little bit of slack. There's a service loop here, and there'll be a little bit of slack on the clutch side as well. And the reason for that is, if I ever go to a larger or taller stem mount in the future, so this part here, I'm going to need more slack, and I also need more slack in the portrait orientation than I would in the landscape orientation. Like if I turned it sideways, for example, the loop is shorter because that's where it came out. The other thing I did was, it's going to be a little difficult to see here, I also put heat shrink over the entire length of the cable coming out of the wireless phone charger. Wasn't really thrilled with that wire quality, and obviously it's going down the handlebar, and could get abraded. It's going to be moved around by the wind and vibration and stuff. So it's just one more layer of protection. Also, even though this device is, and I think I mentioned in the other video, it's supposed to be IP66 rated, so that's a water and dust impervious intrusion level, which is fairly high. Where the wire was going into the back of the phone mount didn't look that well sealed to me, and the way they decided to put it, now this is the orientation with their logo facing up, and you can see the wire is coming up and out instead of down and out. I would have thought that they would have put the wire down on the bottom. So that means any water, any raindrops that hit this would be fed right down into the device. So I took some black silicone or RTV and coated that area before I put the heat shrink up, and put the, once I slid the heat shrink up onto it, then I heated it and shrunk it down to it. So it has an extra layer of protection for water intrusion that way. So let's get into the connections. And again, the bike is torn down for other reasons. I replaced the battery, as I mentioned earlier, and doing some work on my LED lighting. But here's the wire coming out of the phone mount that I just talked about with the heat shrink on it. And I put the waterproof connector on. So this end is the male end, and the reason I did it this way was twofold. One, I didn't want the pins exposed, so that should something get in there, it would short out if this was on the power supply end anyway. And the other thing is, this will be facing down, so obviously the water would draw away from this instead of into this if it was mounted upward. Not real happy with the percentage of shrink I got out of this heat shrink here. I'm not quite sure what, if anything, I'm going to do about that, because it looks like water's going to try and go straight down in there. So I may wind up putting a wire tie on there and cinching it up. And then this is the supply side that we saw heading into the fairing from the other side. And again, you can see this yellow rubber accordion seal here. It's more like silicone or soft plastic. So that's your weatherproof seal. Also in the back of each connector, and I'll show again in a second, is a little rubber-proof seal that goes around each wire. And what that does is doesn't let water come in from the backside like in the scenario I was just talking about. And as you can see, they just go together like this. It's a little difficult to do one-handed, but you'll get the idea. And positively clicks in place. And what I'll do is I'll wire tie this up under the handlebar like that. And once everything, wire tie it up like that. And once everything's cinched up tight here, I think it won't be very intrusive. You're not really going to notice it looking at it from the outside of the bike. And obviously did the same thing on the clutch side. Here's the feed here, and I'll wire tie that up as well. So this would be open because I don't have a device to connect to it right now. So what I did was, and I'll take this opportunity to explain the connector. So here's the connector. This is the side with the male pins would go into. And there's the end that the wires go through. So these little yellow plugs, before you assemble it, they slide over the wire, and they will plug this hole. Sorry, my hands are in the way. And you push that down until it's recessed about 1/16 of an inch underneath the level. So what I did was I took one of those extras and went ahead and put the yellow rubber connectors in there. You can't see them through the backing plate there, and coated it with RTV silicone. So should I ever take the phone mount off, I can plug it with one of these. I'll make 2 of them, and this will go on the clutch side until I have a device there, just to keep it water impervious. Not the greatest look in the world. Again, I wish these were just a little bit smaller, but I already bought them and I was really happy with the performance. I use these on my some of the auxiliary lighting I have in the rear for the saddlebags, and I was pretty happy with them, so I decided to go ahead and use them because I haven't had any corrosion issues or anything like that, and they're definitely up to the amperage that we're going to be drawing. So that's pretty much the end of the physical connections. Obviously this is very much bike specific, except for the phone mount itself. I have tested it again, and it does start charging the phone immediately. Every time I've mounted it, it said it was fast charging. So that's something to watch out for if you buy, these X brand things off Amazon or the internet or whatever. If they say slow charging, whatever, you're just never going to get there, especially if you have Google Maps or something open where the display's lit the whole time. If it's slow charging, you'll be lucky if you just maintain the level of charge you have, let alone charge the phone. It needs to be able to have enough power to charge your phone through your case in fast charging mode. And it shouldn't draw a buttload of current doing that. You know, it should, this is an 1.25 amp max, and that's more than sufficient. And again, also you want to make sure it has overcharging protective circuitry in it. So I'm going to live with it for a little while, try and do a few things like I mentioned already. Since this backing plate is big and covers up my external camera, I won't be able to use it covers up my rear camera. I won't be able to use this mount for making forward-looking vlogs. But what I can do is show the rider, you know, have the screen-mounted camera facing back at me and, you know, kind of looking at my helmet, and you can see the trees and stuff or whatever go past. You just won't be able to see down the road. I could make a vlog that way. If that really becomes a big issue, again, I don't know whether I would get a different mount or just go with a GoPro or what have you. So I hope you found all this helpful. Again, if you liked the content, please give it a thumbs up. Hit subscribe if you want to see more of this content, and notification to be alerted when we post a new video. Thanks. Ride safe. Namaste. Hit subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and then notifications so you are alerted of new videos as they happen. Ride safe. Namaste.